Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Great to be here.
Today we're looking at, well, one of the most unsettling questions you can ask. What actually happens to your mind when you decide God is dead?
And we're not talking theology.
No, not at all. We're not asking if God is in the clouds. We're asking if you delete that God function from the human software, does the whole system just crash? Or maybe worse, does it download a virus? Something called, say, totalitarianism.
It's a huge question. We're basically looking at how atheism, neurosis, and even the rise of dictators might all be symptoms of the same core psychological problem.
And for this deep dive, we're going into Carl Jung's Psychology and Religion. These were his Terry lectures from 1937. And you have to remember the context.
Oh, absolutely.
This is right before the world just explodes into World War II. So when Jung is talking about mass psychosis, he's not. He's not guessing. He's watching it unfold in real time.
That context is everything. And he's very clear. He isn't speaking as a priest or a philosopher. He says he's a doctor, an empiricist.
Which is funny because you hear empiricists and you think lab coats, charts, data. But Jung's talking about the soul. How can you be empirical about something you can't even see?
That's the first big hurdle you have to get over with Jung. For him, the psyche, the mind, the soul, whatever you want to call it, it's a biological fact. It's real.
Okay.
And he argues that if an idea exists in the mind and, it produces real-world effects, then it is psychologically real.
Psychologically real. I mean, that sounds a little like a loophole, doesn't it?
Well, it could.
Like saying it's real just because I think it is.
Not quite. Think of it more in terms of cause and effect. Jung uses this really stark analogy in the text, the one about the cancer patient.
Right, the man with the phantom tumor.
Exactly. He had a patient who was 100% convinced he had bowel cancer. He went to all the doctors, got x-rays, everything. Physically,
He was fine.
perfectly healthy, no cancer cells. But psychologically, the idea of the cancer was destroying his life. It cost him his job, his relationships, sent him into this deep depression.
So the idea the tumor had the same destructive power as a real one, even though it wasn't, like, made of atoms.
That is Jung's entire point.
Yeah.
We accept physical threats.
Yeah.
A virus, an earthquake. We say that's real. But we dismiss psychic threats. We say, oh, it's just your imagination, or snap out of it, it's all in your head.
Yeah.
Jung says that psychic dangers, neuroses, ideologies, obsessions, are actually more dangerous than earthquakes.
More dangerous than an earthquake. That feels like a bit of a stretch.
Does it, though? I mean, an earthquake can destroy a city, sure. But a psychic infection, an idea that possesses an entire population, that can burn down a whole continent. Jung would say the great wars of the 20th century weren't natural disasters. They were psychic epidemics.
Wow. That puts a very different spin on history. And before we get into how these ideas actually infect us, and specifically the God idea, just a quick thing. We're wading into some pretty deep waters today, exploring the architecture of your mind. So if you like my channel, if you find this stuff valuable, please subscribe and press the like button. It really, really helps us keep these deep dives coming.
So yeah, once he establishes that ideas are real forces, Jung then moves on to define what religion actually is.
Yeah.
And he's not talking about going to church on Sundays.
Right. He makes that big distinction in the text between religion and creed, which I always thought were basically the same thing.
Most people do. But Jung goes back to the Latin root, religio. And it means something like a careful observation of something he calls the numinosum.
The numinosum. Okay, I've heard that term, but break it down for us. What is that?
It's a term he borrowed from Rudolf Otto. The numinosum is an experience. It's a dynamic force, an effect that you didn't cause with your own will. It's something that just seizes you.
Seizes you. That sounds kind of aggressive.
It can be. It's that feeling of being in the presence of something immense, powerful, completely outside your control. It's the burning bush in the desert. It's a vision that hits you out of nowhere. It's that moment of absolute awe and maybe a little bit of terror.
So that's religion in its raw form. It's not something you do. It's something that happens to you.
Precisely.
So if that's religion, getting hit by metaphorical lightning, what's a creed? What is Christianity or Buddhism in this model?
Jung calls creeds defenses.
Defenses? That's strange. I always thought the church was supposed to, help you connect with God, not defend you from him.
And that's the great paradox. Jung argues that direct contact with the numinosum, with that raw, untamed divine energy, is terrifying. It's like grabbing a live wire. It can completely shatter your personality. So over thousands of years, humanity developed dogmas, Rituals, creeds, they're like insulating gloves. They build a safe structure so you can relate to that immense power without being incinerated by it.
The ritual is a shield. It gives the chaos a form.
Exactly. Which brings us to the core case study of the book. Jung introduces this patient who had basically thrown away all those shields.
The intellectual scientist. I mean, this guy feels so modern. He sounds like half the people you argue with online.
He really is the prototype, isn't he? Brilliant, rational, a scientist. He was raised Catholic, but, got educated and threw it all away as superstition. But he comes to Jung because, for all his intellect, he's a neurotic wreck. He's falling apart.
And he brings Jung, 400 dreams, which honestly sounds like a nightmare in itself. But there's one dream in particular that Jung really zooms in on, the cathedral dream.
It's the absolute turning point. So in the dream, the patient is in a church. He knows it's God's church, but it looks all wrong. It looks more like a mosque, he says, like the Hagia Sophia. And the key detail, there are no images, no statues, no paintings.
And then a voice speaks.
Yes, a voice from the dream. Jung is careful to say this is not a psychotic hallucination. It's an authoritative voice from his own unconscious.
And the voice says something incredibly strange. It says, "What you are doing is dangerous. Religion is not a tax you pay to get rid of the woman's image. Religion is the ultimate achievement."
So much is packed into that one sentence.
Let's unpack it. A tax you pay to get rid of the woman's image. What does that even mean? What's the woman?
It's deeper than just relationship problems. For Jung, the woman's image is the anima. It's the feminine, feeling, instinctual side of a man's unconscious.
Okay.
This scientist lived completely in his head, in his intellect. He used that intellect to push down his emotions, to repress his anima. He was treating religion, or his rejection of it, as just another way to avoid dealing with life.
So he was kind of saying, look, I'll be a good, rational atheist. I'll pay that tax. Just leave me alone so I don't have to deal with all my messy feelings.
Exactly. Like paying protection money to his own soul. And the voice in the dream calls him out on it. It says, no, that's not how this works. You can't use religion as an escape. It tells him religion is the ultimate achievement because it demands you integrate everything, the feelings, the mess, the anima. You can't just slice that part off and call yourself whole.
It's just wild that his own unconscious was basically smarter than his conscious scientific brain. The dream was staging an intervention.
Jung would say the unconscious is often wiser. It sees the whole picture when our conscious ego only sees a tiny piece of it.
This gets us to the part of the lectures that I'll admit was the toughest for me, but maybe the most interesting, the numbers. This whole conflict between 3 and 4.
Ah, yes, the trinity versus the quaternity.
To a modern ear, it just sounds like numerology or something. Why would a serious psychologist care if his patient is dreaming about the number 4?
Because it's all about symbolism. The patient grew up in the Christian tradition. What's at the heart of that?
The Trinity. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. 3.
Right. And the number 3, symbolically, for centuries, has represented the spirit, the masculine, the good, the perfect, the light. Think of a triangle printing up. It's an ideal.
Okay, 3 is perfection. What's wrong with that?
The problem is that reality isn't perfect. And the patient's dreams keep hammering on the number 4. Because the unconscious doesn't care about perfection. It wants wholeness.
So what's the 4th thing that's missing from the Trinity?
The 4th is everything the Trinity leaves out. It's the earth, the body, the feminine, and most importantly, it's the shadow. It's evil.
Wait, so you're saying the idea of the Trinity is this beautiful spiritual ideal, but it kind of ignores the messy, physical, dark parts of being human?
That's the argument. If you only worship the light and the good, the 3, you are actively repressing the dark and the body, the 4th. You're splitting reality in 2. And whatever you repress, well, it comes back to haunt you as a neurosis.
So the number 4 is about including the devil in the math, so to speak.
In a psychological sense, absolutely. You have to acknowledge your own shadow. You can't just pretend it isn't there. And Jung points to this incredible vision the patient had. The world clock. That's where it all comes together.
This was a really trippy image. Describe it for us.
The patient saw this 3-dimensional mandala. It was a vertical blue circle and a horizontal gold circle, intersecting like a gyroscope. And inside it were 4 colors and 4 little men, and the whole thing was in motion.
It sounds like some kind of cosmic machine.
It was, and the patient said it gave him this feeling of sublime harmony. Jung says this is a symbol of the self. It's the patient's unconscious finally managing to reconcile the 3, the spiritual ideal, with the 4, the messy, material reality.
So instead of fighting his own nature, his mind built a model that included everything. even the parts he tried to ignore.
That is the goal, finding that balance, because, and this is where we get to the absolute heart of the matter, when you deny that fourth, when you deny the dark, the earthy, the irrational side of the psyche, it doesn't just vanish, it waits.
And it waits is the perfect transition to the most political part of Jung's work here. This is where we zoom out from one neurotic scientist to, well, the entire modern world. We have to talk about the death of God.
This is where Jung proves he's not just a doctor for people, but a doctor for an entire culture. He takes on Nietzsche's famous line, "God is dead."
Right. And today, most people hear that and they think, yeah, okay, we're atheists now, we're rational, science is king, we've moved on.
Jung says that is a catastrophic misunderstanding of how psychic energy actually works.
Yeah.
See, for thousands of years, this enormous amount of psychic energy, all our awe, our fear, our hope, our submission, was projected outwards onto the image of God. God was the container for all that intensity.
So when you smash the container, when you say God doesn't exist, that energy has to go somewhere. It's like physics. Energy isn't destroyed, just transferred.
Exactly. And Jung asks the terrifying question, where does it flow? It doesn't just evaporate, it flows back into the human subject, back into the ego.
And this causes what he calls inflation.
Yes, but let's be super clear. Inflation here isn't just about being arrogant or having a big ego, it's about being possessed. The individual ego puffs up because it's suddenly trying to carry an energy that used to belong to a god.
So the person starts to feel godlike.
They feel they're beyond good and evil. They feel they can remake the world in their own image. Jung uses Nietzsche himself as the prime example. He says Nietzsche couldn't handle the divine energy he unleashed. He became so inflated that his mind literally cracked. He dissociated.
But the really scary part isn't one philosopher losing his mind. It's when this happens to a whole country.
This is the danger of the isms. When a whole society loses its religious container, that God energy flows into the state. Jung writes that when God goes, the energy reappears as Wotan, the old Germanic god of war, or just as the party or the nation.
So he traded a divine tyrant for a political one.
And the political one is so much worse. Because the old religious image at least had beauty, history, depth. The state is just a machine. Jung says that modern mass movements, communism, fascism, even a certain kind of extreme rationalism, are just new religions in disguise. We think we're being rational, but we're actually possessed by these ancient unconscious forces.
That explains the almost religious fervor you see in politics, the rallies, the absolute hatred for the other side, the obsession with ideological purity. It's all the mechanics of religion, but with none of the safeguards.
It is mass psychosis. Jung says we're terrified of our neighbors because we're projecting our own unacknowledged shadow onto them. Because we refuse to deal with the God energy consciously. It possesses us from behind. We become slaves to the state because we refuse to be servants to the divine.
That is a chilling thought. Slaves to the state because we refuse to be servants to the divine. So if the external God is gone for so many of us and the state is a monster, where's the solution? Where is all that energy supposed to go?
Jung says we have to go back to the mandala, back to that world clock vision the scientist had.
The intersecting circles with the four little men?
Yeah. Think about traditional religious art, a traditional mandala. Who's in the center?
God, or Christ, or Buddha, a
Yeah.
divine figure.
Always. But in the modern mandalas that Jung was seeing, like the one his patient produced, the center is often empty. Or it has a symbol in it, like a star, a flower, a mechanism.
What does that shift mean, the empty center?
It means the location of the God image has moved. It's moved from outside projected up into the heavens to inside the psyche.
Wait, hold on. Is he saying that we are God? That I'm God? Because that sounds exactly like the inflation problem we were just talking about.
No, and he's very, very careful about this distinction. He calls this inner center the self. The self is not the ego. The ego is just your conscious I, the part of you that's talking right now. The self is the total personality, your conscious mind plus the vast, vast ocean of the unconscious. The self is godlike in its power compared to the tiny little ego. But it's an internal psychological fact, not a metaphysical claim.
So the modern task then is to find this center inside ourselves.
Yes, to find the God within. And if you can anchor yourself to that internal center, you don't need to project that godlike authority onto a dictator or a political party. You don't get inflated because you realize the self is so much bigger than you. You become humble before your own soul in a way.
And that's what prevents the mass psychosis.
He believed it was the only thing that could prevent it. That unless individuals learn how to relate to this inner power, this religious instinct, psychologically, we are just doomed to repeat these ideological wars forever. We have to learn to handle the fire that used to be held by God.
This brings us completely full circle. We started with a man terrified of bowel cancer, and we've ended with the fate of civilization resting on whether or not we can face our own unconscious.
It sounds incredibly dramatic, but for Jung, it was just the plain truth. The psyche is the only reality we ever experience directly. So if the house of your mind is on fire, the whole world is going to burn.
So to wrap it up, Jung is saying you can't just opt out of religion. You can stop going to church, you can be an atheist. But that religious function, that need to relate to something greater than your ego, that's hardwired.
It's hardwired. You either deal with it consciously and work with it, build your own mandala of wholeness, or you push it down. It comes back from the shadows as a neurosis, a phobia, or worse, a political fanaticism.
It's like the voice said in that dream. Religion is the ultimate achievement. Not a creed you follow, but a way of living that includes everything. The light and the dark, the three and the four.
And remember what happened to the patient. He didn't become some born-again believer. He didn't run back to the dogmatic church of his youth. But he found peace. He found an inner authority.
He stopped being possessed by his own fear.
Yes. And Jung ends by saying that a religious experience is an absolute fact for the person who has it. You can't argue them out of it. If it brings life and wholeness, it is psychologically true. And whether you say that truth comes from a theological God or a psychological structure, the effect is what matters. To deny the reality of the psyche is to court disaster.
That's the takeaway, really. You can't just ignore the voice in the dream because you have a PhD.
Ignoring it is the most dangerous thing you could possibly do.
I want to leave all of you with a thought to chew on. We love to think we're the captains of our own ship, right? That we make our choices based on pure logic. But Jung suggests that a lot of the time the captain's chair is empty. Or worse, it's occupied by a ghost we refuse to even look at. If we deny the God inside, we don't become free. We just become slaves to new, invisible masters, our own anxieties, or the terrifying power of the state. So ask yourself, are you ruling your own house, or is there a voice you're ignoring?
It's a question worth asking every single day.
Thank you for listening. This has been Thinking Deeper by 6-7.